Scariest story by far that I've ever read, and it's from the Appalachian Mountains. So let's get into it. If you're new here, hi. I usually talk about some pretty scary stuff, and I actually have an email where anyone finds this page can send me their ghost stories. In all honesty, I do get a lot of emails, and I have to say, without a doubt, the scariest ones that I've ever gotten are from the Appalachian Mountains, and this is one of them. The story comes from Bella, who says that her and her family moved to the Appalachian Mountains when she was about 14 in 2019. So the rules of the Appalachian land were not existent for any of them in their family. As Bella attends her first week of school, she meets two girls, Brooke and Sarah. They hit it off almost immediately, and after a couple of Snapchats here and there throughout the weeks, they decide they want to have a sleepover. Now, for context purposes, the way that the land is set up on this property is there's Bella's house, and then there is like a line of trees that outline the backyard. And that is what separates the property lines between Bella's yard and her neighbors. But we're not talking about like a normal fence line. We're talking about the fence line being a forested, wooded area. On the day of the sleepover, they all carpool home with Bella to her house. And the moment that they get to Bella's house, they start deciding what they want to do for the night. Sarah immediately says that she wants to wander around the woods and tell scary stories. Bella agrees, and Brooke is a little hesitant because of what the locals have been saying about the woods. And when they asked their friend to explain, Brooke just said, I don't know, the locals said that it's dangerous to walk around the woods at night. Both Bella and Sarah are like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, I've never heard of anything in my life that sounds like that. And they just kind of dismiss her. Now, upon nightfall, they follow the trail down to the wooded area. They bring some alcohol and some recreational items and decide to make a little party out of it. Eventually, they stumble across this little church in the middle of the woods and decide that is their camp for the night. As they're sitting on the stairs of this church, they are just talking, hanging out, when all of a sudden, Sarah needs to go to the bathroom. So she gets up and she walks around the side of the building. And after a couple of minutes of dead silence, Sarah comes sprinting back and says, we need to go. We need to go right now. Both of the other girls are like, what are you talking about? We just got here. We're having a good time. What's going on? Sarah does not explain, and she says, we just need to go. We need to go. So all three of them pack up and they head back to Bella's house. Now, it's important to note that they left the bottle of alcohol that they were drinking at the church because they were all kind of spooked after Sarah came back breathless and telling them that they needed to go. After they're back at Bella's house, Sarah explains that she, in fact, saw a pair of eyes watching her from the woods, and then proceeds to tell the girls that they need to lock all the windows and close the blinds. And she continuously tries to say, I tried telling you guys that the woods were dangerous. There's a reason why there's rules out here in the Appalachian Mountains. This isn't a joke. And right as she's explaining why they don't go into the woods, they hear a tap at the window. And it is loud enough where they all stop talking and kind of look at the window that is closed by the curtains. And as the silence ensues in the room, they hear another tap. This time the tap is loud enough where they all get so startled that they just leave the bedroom and move into the living room area where they didn't cover the window. And as they are all sitting in the living room, Sarah begins to cry out of pure fear. Obviously, with the window still being open, Brooke gets up to go close the blinds and immediately screams upon standing up. And when Bella is like, what happened? All Brooke could say was that she saw what Sarah was talking about. There was a woman standing at the property line. And obviously we're not talking about a normal looking human being. This woman was pale, emaciated, with jet black hair, and was standing at the property line looking directly at the girls through the window. At which point all the girls start joining hands and praying, eventually falling asleep after a while. They all wake up and Bella is the first one awake, walks outside, and the very first thing that she sees at her doorstep is a bottle of alcohol, the same bottle of alcohol that they left at the church, sitting at her front door. It's important to note that Bella says that this bottle of alcohol looked like it was drugged through the mud. She picked it up with a napkin, tossed it into the trash bin, and did not tell the other girls about it. About a year after this incident, Bella and her family decided to sell their home in the Appalachian Mountains and move back to Cincinnati. She never told anything to her parents out of sheer fear because I don't think her parents really knew about the rules of the Appalachian Mountains either. But her, Sarah, and Brooke are all still very close, and they all remember the story very vividly. And from a personal perspective, I don't know how people exist up there because every story that I have heard of has been absolutely terrifying, especially if it's in the Appalachian Mountains. But anyways, that's going to do it for me. Stay tuned for my ghost stories.
And this story is why I'm so happy I don't live in a house that has a basement. So grab your favorite tea and settle in, and let me tell you another scary story, because of course, this is Tea After Midnight. This story comes from Anonymous, and the title is The Shadow People in the Basement. When I was a kid, my parents always told me to stay out of the basement because there were shadow people down there. I never really thought too much of it until I got older. In the grand scheme of things, I just thought there were things down there they didn't want me to be around. I was 12 when I first saw them. My parents went on a date one night and left me by myself. They were only going to be gone for a few hours and thought I'd be just fine by myself. It was around 9 p.m. and I was sitting in the living room watching a movie and eating my dinner when I heard banging in the basement. I stopped in my tracks and just sat there listening, trying to rationalize what I was hearing. But then it stopped. My heart was pounding so loud and I didn't know what to do. I grabbed the landline. This was in the early 2000s, and I called my parents to tell them I heard something in the basement. My dad answered and told me it was probably just the pipes and not to worry, that they would be home very soon. He told me to go upstairs to their bedroom and close and lock the door and wait for them to get back, and I did just that. I sat there for maybe 20 minutes, but to me it felt like forever because I was so scared. Mom and Dad got back and my dad checked the entire basement as well as the rest of the house, but there was nothing there. After I calmed down, my mom took me to bed and tucked me in and said if I needed her for anything, she would be right down the hall. Trying to fall asleep that night felt impossible, and I kept getting this overwhelming sense of fear. My bed was facing directly toward the door to my room, which led into the hallway, and down the hall was my parents' room. When my mom left my room, she didn't shut my door. She just turned off all the lights and went to her room and kept her door open in case I needed her. So I'm lying in bed in the pitch black dark with no light other than the moon shining in my window. As I look up out into the hallway from my bed, I could faintly see shadows in the hall. These shadows looked like people. Thinking my mind was playing tricks on me, I hid under the covers and peeked out to see if they were still there, and they were. But this time, they were in my room. I started to scream for my mom and dad because I was petrified, and when my dad came to the hallway and flipped the light on, every shadow disappeared. It was the scariest thing I had ever encountered, or so I thought. Fast forward to when I was 15. My cousin came to stay the night one night as our parents went out to a get-together of their friends right down the street. My cousin was 1 year older than me, so we always had common interests. She and I were doing our nails and talking about school and boys when we heard talking coming from downstairs. We were in my room, so we snuck down the steps to see if our parents had gotten back yet, but there was no one in the living room. But we still heard the talking, and it sounded like it was coming from the basement. My cousin knew about the time when I was 12 and saw the shadow people, and she said maybe it's them. That thought terrified me, and I told her we needed to get back upstairs. She was always braver than I was, and she started walking to the door of the basement. I grabbed her arm and practically begged her not to go down there, but she turned back around and opened the basement door. A cold chill rushed up the steps, and I got a sick gut feeling not to go down there. She started walking down the steps, calling out, asking if anybody was there, but no one replied. She had already made it to the bottom step, and I was still upstairs, so I walked down to her because I didn't want to be alone. As soon as I finished that sentence, the basement door slammed shut, and the lights in the basement went out. My cousin and I were screaming at the top of our lungs and trying to open the basement door, but it wouldn't open. We tried flipping the basement light on, and it wouldn't turn on. And again, the only light was the moonlight coming in from the top of the window pane of my basement. My cousin started screaming and saying she sees shadows, and when I turned to look, I saw the exact same shadow people that I saw a few years prior in my room. I started crying uncontrollably and kept banging on the basement door trying to get it to open. That's when the basement lights turn back on and the basement door flies open. Our parents were standing on the other side. We both ran to them crying and saying we got locked down there and that we saw shadows. My parents looked at each other, then back at me, trying to console us. My cousin left that night and we've never spoken about it again. But when she left, I was talking to my parents, explaining exactly what we saw and how the door shut on its own. My mom then tells me that she has seen them too. I looked at her in shock and asked her why she didn't tell me. She told me, "Honey, I've always told you there were shadow people down there," and that sentence is forever burned into my brain. When I graduated a few years later, my parents sold the house and we moved a few hours away where I was going to college. I never had any other experiences in that house after that night, but now that I'm older, neither my parents, aunt and uncle, or my cousin talk about what happened or why there were shadow people there, or even really what a shadow person is. If anyone has had a similar experience, I would really like to hear your story. I will never forget the feeling I felt seeing those shadows, but even more will always wonder what those shadows were. So I'm going to be real honest with you, I'm not even sure what a shadow person is. I mean, I have read and heard stories about shadow people before, but I truly don't know what they are. So I too would be interested to know if anybody else has had an experience like this. But first I want to touch on, what does the mom know? Because obviously she knows way more than she's letting on. But to teach her from such a young age about the shadow people and that there's shadow people in the basement, obviously this has been going on for quite some time for her to have brought it up to her daughter so she knows, like, there's shadow people in the basement. But I'm telling you this, if I were told that at her age, that there were shadow people in the basement, as I got older, I would be so curious. I gotta know who the shadow people are. What did you see? What experience have you had? Because that is creepy. But not only just hearing the banging and then trying to go to bed that night, but can't go to sleep. And honestly, I would be the same way. I don't think I'd be able to fall asleep either. But then the shadow people, seeing them in the hallway, and then they came into her room, absolutely not. Fast forward a few years, like she said, her and her cousin are hanging out. They hear talking in the basement. So they go down there and they don't see anything down there. But while they're there, the door slams shut on its own and the lights go out. That is so crazy. So if anybody has had a similar experience like that, please send the story over, because I would love to do a little bit more research to know exactly what this is. Or if you know what it is, please comment down below and let everyone know, because I am really curious to know what a shadow person is. But that does conclude this episode of Tea After Midnight. But if you have any personal scary stories you want to share, I would love to read them, and you can send them to the email that's going to be on the screen right here, or the email in the caption of this video. But as always, you guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have the best night. I love you. And I'll catch you in the next one. Bye. And this story is why I'm so happy I don't live in a house that has a basement. So grab your favorite tea and settle in, and let me tell you another scary story. Because of course, this is Tea After Midnight. This story comes from Anonymous, and the title is The Shadow People in the Basement. When I was a kid, my parents always told me to stay out of the basement because there were shadow people down there. I never really thought too much of it until I got older. In the grand scheme of things, I just thought there were things down there they didn't want me to be around. I was 12 when I first saw them. My parents went on a date one night and left me by myself. They were only going to be gone for a few hours and thought I'd be just fine by myself. It was around 9 p.m. and I was sitting in the living room watching a movie and eating my dinner when I heard banging in the basement. I stopped in my tracks and just sat there listening, trying to rationalize what I was hearing. But then it stopped. My heart was pounding so loud and I didn't know what to do. I grabbed the landline. This was in the early 2000s, and I called my parents to tell them I heard something in the basement. My dad answered and told me it was probably just the pipes and not to worry, that they would be home very soon. He told me to go upstairs to their bedroom and close and lock the door and wait for them to get back, and I did just that. I sat there for maybe 20 minutes, but to me it felt like forever because I was so scared. Mom and Dad got back, and my dad checked the entire basement as well as the rest of the house, but there was nothing there. After I calmed down, my mom took me to bed and tucked me in and said if I needed her for anything, she would be right down the hall. Trying to fall asleep that night felt impossible, and I kept getting this overwhelming sense of fear. My bed was facing directly toward the door to my room, which led into the hallway, and down the hall was my parents' room. When my mom left my room, she didn't shut my door. She just turned off all the lights and went to her room and kept her door open in case I needed her. So I'm lying in bed in the pitch black dark with no light other than the moon shining in my window. As I look up out into the hallway from my bed, I could faintly see shadows in the hall. These shadows looked like people. Thinking my mind was playing tricks on me, I hid under the covers and peeked out to see if they were still there, and they were. But this time, they were in my room. I started to scream for my mom and dad because I was petrified, and when my dad came to the hallway and flipped the light on, every shadow disappeared. It was the scariest thing I had ever encountered, or so I thought. Fast forward to when I was 15. My cousin came to stay the night one night as our parents went out to a get-together of their friends right down the street. My cousin was 1 year older than me, so we always had common interests. She and I were doing our nails and talking about school and boys when we heard talking coming from downstairs. We were in my room, so we snuck down the steps to see if our parents had gotten back yet, but there was no one in the living room. But we still heard the talking, and it sounded like it was coming from the basement. My cousin knew about the time when I was 12 and saw the shadow people, and she said maybe it's them. That thought terrified me, and I told her we needed to get back upstairs. She was always braver than I was, and she started walking to the door of the basement. I grabbed her arm and practically begged her not to go down there, but she turned back around and opened the basement door. A cold chill rushed up the steps, and I got a sick gut feeling not to go down there. She started walking down the steps, calling out, asking if anybody was there, but no one replied. She had already made it to the bottom step, and I was still upstairs, so I walked down to her because I didn't want to be alone. As soon as I finished that sentence, the basement door slammed shut, and the lights in the basement went out. My cousin and I were screaming at the top of our lungs and trying to open the basement door, but it wouldn't open. We tried flipping the basement light on, and it wouldn't turn on. And again, the only light was the moonlight coming in from the top of the window pane of my basement. My cousin started screaming and saying she sees shadows, and when I turned to look, I saw the exact same shadow people that I saw a few years prior in my room. I started crying uncontrollably and kept banging on the basement door trying to get it to open. That's when the basement lights turn back on and the basement door flies open. Our parents were standing on the other side. We both ran to them crying and saying we got locked down there and that we saw shadows. My parents looked at each other, then back at me, trying to console us. My cousin left that night and we've never spoken about it again. But when she left, I was talking to my parents, explaining exactly what we saw and how the door shut on its own. My mom then tells me that she has seen them too. I looked at her in shock and asked her why she didn't tell me. She told me, "Honey, I've always told you there were shadow people down there," and that sentence is forever burned into my brain. When I graduated a few years later, my parents sold the house and we moved a few hours away where I was going to college. I never had any other experiences in that house after that night, but now that I'm older, neither my parents, aunt and uncle, or my cousin talk about what happened or why there were shadow people there, or even really what a shadow person is. If anyone has had a similar experience, I would really like to hear your story. I will never forget the feeling I felt seeing those shadows, but even more will always wonder what those shadows were. So I'm going to be real honest with you, I'm not even sure what a shadow person is. I mean, I have read and heard stories about shadow people before, but I truly don't know what they are. So I too would be interested to know if anybody else has had an experience like this. But first I want to touch on, what does the mom know? Because obviously she knows way more than she's letting on. But to teach her from such a young age about the shadow people and that there's shadow people in the basement, obviously this has been going on for quite some time for her to have brought it up to her daughter so she knows, like, there's shadow people in the basement. But I'm telling you this, if I were told that at her age, that there were shadow people in the basement, as I got older, I would be so curious. I gotta know who the shadow people are. What did you see? What experience have you had? Because that is creepy. But not only just hearing the banging and then trying to go to bed that night, but can't go to sleep. And honestly, I would be the same way. I don't think I'd be able to fall asleep either. But then the shadow people, seeing them in the hallway and then they came into her room, absolutely not. Fast forward a few years, like she said, her and her cousin are hanging out. They hear talking in the basement. So they go down there and they don't see anything down there. But while they're there, the door slams shut on its own and the lights go out. That is so crazy. So if anybody has had a similar experience like that, please send the story over because I would love to do a little bit more research to know exactly what this is. Or if you know what it is, please comment down below and let everyone know because I am really curious to know what a shadow person is. But that does conclude this episode of Tea After Midnight. But if you have any personal scary stories you want to share, I would love to read them, and you can send them to the email that's going to be on the screen right here or the email in the caption of this video. But as always, you guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have the best night. I love you, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.
What would you do if you were cleaning a large house alone and the owners tell you that there's one room that you don't need to clean, and every time you pass this room, you see something? This is Scared with Jess, and today's story is about a woman who was a housekeeper, and she says that the worst thing about that room was not the room itself, but what kept appearing in the doorway whenever she would pass by. I used to clean houses for a living, and most of the time it was just normal rich people messes. Expensive kitchens, too many bathrooms, dog hair everywhere, nothing worth telling stories about. This happened in one house I worked in for maybe 5 months, and it is the only place I ever quit without notice. The house belonged to a couple in their 50s. Very formal, very private. They had a big old place, not a mansion exactly, but enough that it took me most of the day to do it properly. They had one rule from the start. I did not need to clean the mother's room. The husband's mother lived there too, upstairs in the back bedroom. He told me she was bedridden and had a private nurse some days, and on the days I cleaned, I could skip that room entirely. He said his mother did not like strangers and the family preferred to handle that part themselves. Fine by me. That kind of thing wasn't unusual. The first time I noticed something strange was maybe my second week there. I was vacuuming the upstairs hall, and as I passed her room, I saw her standing in the doorway. That by itself made me jump because I had been told she was bedridden. She was an older woman, very thin, white hair hanging flat, in a long pale nightgown. She was just standing there, looking at me. I smiled automatically and said, "Good morning." She didn't answer. Then the homeowner's husband came up the stairs behind me carrying towels, and I turned to say something to him, just something along the lines of, that his mom was up. But when I looked back, the doorway was empty. He went right past the room and didn't seem to notice anything. I asked casually if his mother was feeling better, and he stopped and looked at me oddly and said, "She hasn't gotten out of bed in months." I laughed because I thought maybe he was joking. He wasn't. After that, I tried not to look directly at the room when I went by, but it got harder because things kept happening around that doorway. Some days the door would be almost shut, even though I passed it open earlier. Other days I would hear someone talking inside, but never a full conversation. More like one low voice and then long pauses. I told myself maybe the nurse was there. Then one Wednesday I heard the same low voice from the room, walked by a minute later, and the whole upstairs was empty except for me. The thing that started really to get to me was the smell. Not every time, but just sometimes. I'd be cleaning the hall bathroom or dusting the table at the top of the stairs, and all at once the air outside the bedroom would smell foul. Not like sickness exactly, more like old water and something spoiled underneath it. The smell would be there for maybe 30 seconds and then just gone. One afternoon, I was changing sheets in the guest room across the hall and heard the mother laughing. Not loud, just a little laugh. It sounded wrong for some reason. Not because old women can't laugh, just because it sounded private, like she was responding to something said right beside her. I looked out into the hall and could see part of her doorway from where I stood. There was a shadow moving on the wall inside that room. Not from the hall light, not from me. It was moving across the far wall in a way that looked like somebody pacing inside, but too close to the bed to make sense. I left that floor and did the downstairs kitchen until I felt calm enough to go back. The homeowners never acted like anything was odd. That was part of what made it worse. They were stiff people to begin with, and the mother was never mentioned much, just little updates like she had a hard night or the nurse came early. I started wondering if maybe everybody in that house had just learned not to talk about whatever was happening. Then one day I saw her again. This time she wasn't in the doorway. She was in the bed, where she was supposed to be. The door was open wider than usual because the nurse had apparently been there earlier. I wasn't looking in on purpose. I just glanced while carrying a basket past. She was propped up on pillows, very still, staring at the ceiling. What scared me was not her. It was the corner behind the bed. There was someone else standing there, and I know what I saw. Not clearly enough to tell you a face, but there was a figure in that corner, taller than the bed, too dark against the wallpaper, and I stopped, walking without meaning to, and looked straight into the room. The old woman's eyes shifted. Very slowly, without turning her head, she looked right at me. And from the corner, something whispered, "Don't." I dropped the basket, and by the time I bent to grab it, the homeowner's wife was at the stairs asking if everything was all right. I said yes, because I didn't know what else to say. She looked at me for a second and then at my mother-in-law's room, then back at me. She didn't ask anything else. And after that, I started rushing the upstairs cleaning as fast as I could. I wanted to be in and out before lunch. I didn't wear headphones anymore and I didn't hum to myself. I wanted to hear everything and stay alert. The scariest day was the last one. I was polishing the upstairs hallway table when I heard the old woman speaking clearly for the first time, not muttering or laughing or speaking this time. She said, "No, not her." I froze, and then another voice answered. Not loud, but it was louder than hers. I could not make out the exact words, but I heard enough to know it was not her voice, and it was not coming from the hallway. It was inside the room with her. I started backing towards the stairs, and that's when the bedroom door opened a little wider on its own. I know people say that and it sounds fake. I don't care. It did open wider. And I could see the mother sitting up in bed now, a lot straighter than I had ever seen her, and even though I had been told more than once she could barely move by herself, she was looking towards the foot of the bed, not at me. And at the foot of the bed there was something crouched on the floor. I only saw a part of it, one arm, or maybe one shoulder, the shape of a head bent too low. It looked like it was kneeling there with its back to the door. Then the mother looked at me and smiled. Not a sweet old lady smile, not a confused smile. It was the kind of smile people make when they know something you don't. And without taking her eyes off me, she said, "You keep walking by when it's hungry." I left my supplies there and I went downstairs. The wife met me in the foyer, and before I even said anything, she held out my cash for the day. That scared me too, honestly, because it felt like she already knew I was done. I took the money, got in the car, and never came back. I ignored her call the next week, and when she texted asking if I was still planning to clean on Thursday, I blocked her number. I still think about that room more than I want to. Anyway, good luck sleeping tonight.
Hello and welcome back to a series of spooky stories, The Haunted Tea Spill. This series is brought to you by all things spooky and ungodly amounts of paranormal activity. Please don't ask about the headband. I was overstimulated. This was the only way to fix it. Anyways, check out my new shoes.
Not y'all getting a free peep show. I wear a size 8 to 9 depending on what the shoe is. These are actually a size 7, 8 because there was no 8, 9 option. It was either 7, 8 or 9 or 10. But 7, 8 because I was worried it was going to be too big. And as you can see, they fit great and they're so comfortable. I've been wearing them all night.
There, if you want them now under this. My family has always been more connected to the paranormal than the average person. In fact, my great uncle helped with the exorcism that the movie The Exorcist is based on. Not the most famous exorcism ever. I can share more details in the comments if anyone is interested. You know they're gonna be. Come on. So it was pretty normal for my family to understand and believe that stuff is real, except for my mom, who married into it. She didn't believe in the paranormal at all, but after these stories, she changed her mind a little. A few weeks after my older brother was born, my mom put him down for a nap. No one else was at home at the time besides them. Now, there's this sound that the light switch makes in his room, kind of a hollow wooden sound that you could hear switch on and off from anywhere in the house. My mom heard that sound after she left his room. Obviously, it couldn't have been my brother in the crib, so she ran upstairs thinking someone broke in. She saw no one, grabbed my brother, ran out of the house, and called police. Smart lady! They checked the entire house and found no evidence that someone broke in and no person in the house. Around that time, my great-grandmother, who my mom was very close to, passed away. My mom realized that it most likely was my great-grandmother coming to see her grandson before she moved on to whatever comes next, which I always found really comforting to know that she was sort of watching over us. Did she need the light, though? She had to freak her out? That's not all the activity that we had, but I'll share one more positive paranormal interaction. About 10 years after that story, when I was 5, I was playing by myself in the backyard creek. I remember looking up and seeing that I had gotten way too close to a wasp and I started to run from it. It kept chasing me, so I started to run across a bunch of rocks that I'd usually use to cross from the other side of the creek. One of those rocks was always really wet and slippery, so in my haste, I moved too fast and began to slip. I remember seeing the wasp getting within inches of me as I was about to fall, and knowing that it was about to get me, I'd be soaking wet while it did that. But I felt a hand grab my foot, and it steadied my body too. I can still feel all the fingers around the top of my foot. In the same moment, the wasp did a 180 and flew away. I kind of wonder if my great-grandmother stayed on the property to watch out for my brother and I as we grew up, and if she was the one who helped me that day. Sometimes I think that the paranormal is more misunderstood than scary. You know what? That's really valid. Like when they're trying to get people's attention, they kind of like move stuff around. I too tend to throw things sometimes when people don't pay attention to me. If anyone has questions about any of this, I'm happy to answer. My TikTok username is at Nessa Dorsey, NESSADORSEY. Period, Nessa. Not so spooky, maybe a little spooky, but wholesome spooky. Rate it on a scale of 1 to 10, or don't. Probably just ask her the questions in the comments, especially about the exorcism. If you have a story of your own that you want to submit, you can do so on the link tree in my profile. I'll see y'all at the next episode. Stay spooky, friends.
This girl emailed me and said that not only did she go through hell in her extremely haunted house in the UK, but she also encountered a creature that was 3 different species of animals. We're going to call this girl Kate for the story because she didn't even give me her name, so I'm assuming she wanted this to be extremely anonymous. So in 2012, Kate was 10 years old. Her and her family had just moved into their current house that they live in now, and when they very first moved in, everything was pretty normal. The only challenge for them was adjusting to the new area, the new surroundings, and leaving behind what was familiar. So nothing felt unusual in the beginning, but a few months later, things started to change. So Kate's younger brother, who was 4 at the time, and her sister, who was 9, used to play together in the front bedroom. Now, this room will later become Kate's room. So one day they're playing in the front bedroom, and they come running out of the front bedroom, and they run over to Kate, and they seem extremely shaken up. So when they run out of the room, she's like, "What's going on? What's wrong?" And they both tell her that they were playing in the bedroom, and they hear this loud bang coming from the built-in wardrobe. And then they say that they heard a whisper coming from the wardrobe that said, But Kate doesn't really believe them, so she brushes this off. She thinks that they are trying to scare her because it is, after all, her bedroom. So she brushes this off for months because she doesn't want to really think about it, and she eventually does stop thinking about it. Until a few years later, when things became much harder to ignore. So around 2014, 2015, her grandmother unfortunately suffers from a stroke, and she has to move in with a family. Kate and her family weren't really prepared for this, obviously. This is something sudden, and so they had to convert their garage into a proper room for the grandmother. But while that was being built, her mom turned their conservatory into a temporary bedroom, that's kind of like a sunroom. So the grandmother's there at this point, right? And every night they would all take turns to watch over the grandmother to make sure that she wouldn't fall, etc. So most of the time this responsibility would fall on Kate because her bedroom was closest to her grandmother's, and Kate didn't care about this, you know? She wanted to help her grandmother, so she was okay with this responsibility. One night, Kate and her grandmother go to bed and she falls asleep. In the middle of the night, she's sleeping and her eyes just open up for no reason. But Kate has no idea why she woke up, but she does find herself staring straight through the conservatory windows into the garden. At that time, their garden was just trees. There was no lights, there was no decorations, nothing but darkness beyond the glass. And that's when she sees them. 2 men sitting on the fences, and they're just watching her. They were staring directly into her eyes, and they were far enough away that she shouldn't have been able to feel anything. She could feel their presence so strongly, it was suffocating. She said that what scared her the most, though, wasn't their stillness, it was their eyes. It was something about how deeply they were looking into her eyes and how deeply wrong it felt. After that night, she could not bring herself to sleep in that room again, and everything made her anxious. So a few months goes by with this, where she's just riddled with anxiety, and her mom and dad and brother all decide that they're going to go on vacation. They had arranged a temporary accommodation for her grandmother, and so she was just home alone most days. Now, she had just finished secondary school, so she would get home first and she would be by herself because her little sister would be at school still, and her older sister was actually studying for her master's degree in a different city. Well, one morning she wakes up and something is wrong. She can hear her family arguing downstairs. This is what she woke up to. She could clearly hear their voices. And at first she was confused because she was like, why are they arguing? And then she realized they were on vacation. So she just freezes in bed and she's trying to make sense of this situation when eventually she just yells out, "I know you're not home, so what are you doing downstairs?" Then the voices just stop. She said that the silence that followed was almost worse than them talking. But she's a bad bitch because she decides that she's going to go downstairs to check. She opens the door to go downstairs. Nobody's there. No movement, no sound, no nothing. And then she hears it. Something is scratching on the walls. At that point, her instincts just took over and she just booked it out of that house. As she's running, she can feel something behind her running directly behind her. She said that she could literally feel its breath on her neck. And then as it's breathing down her neck, she hears whispering, but she can't make out the words, but it's directly in her ear. She said that that entire week after that, everything just felt off. It felt completely wrong. She was terrified of that house. She was terrified of everything at this point, but at least her sisters were home now. That made her feel a little bit better because she wasn't home alone anymore, but then came the night that she cannot explain to this day. So one night, she's lying on her bed, she's trying to sleep, when she hears a knock on her window, her bedroom window. So at first she ignores it because she is trying to calm herself down. She's like, this is fine. This is nothing. This is probably just something outside hitting against the window. It's my anxiety. And then she hears tap, tap, tap. Something is now slowly and deliberately tapping on her window. So she's just laying there in terror. She eventually gives in and she looks over at her window and something is looking back at her that she still cannot explain to this day, that horrifies her. She said the only way to describe this would be the mixture of a crocodile, a hedgehog, and a rat. And I actually put this into ChatGPT and asked it what it would look like, and this is what I got. Now, I'm not sure if this is what she saw because I haven't talked to her, but what the... She said that its features did not make sense together, and yet there was staring at her through the glass, tapping on her window. She said that she just sat there forever, what felt like forever, trying to process what she was seeing until she just screamed at the top of her lungs. She said she just completely broke down at this point. And as she's breaking down, her sisters come running into the room and they're like, what is going on? What is wrong? And she's like pointing at the window, like, look at the window. And they look at the window and there's nothing there. She said that to this day, she still cannot explain what she saw. She can't explain any of what happened to her. She also said that she has never told anybody this story, but after seeing one of my videos, she decided that she would tell it because she felt like somebody might finally listen. So I did do some research to see if anybody had seen anything similar in the UK, and I couldn't really find anything. There were some sightings of people seeing very strange looking rats with maybe like those spikes or pines on them, whatever you call them. I don't even know what you call them. But I couldn't find anything with this description. So if anyone has ever experienced anything like this, especially specifically in the UK, please drop in the comments. But what did you guys think about that story? Because first of all, the part where her family is downstairs arguing, no thank you. And then the part where she's running out of the door and that thing is whispering behind her, also no thank you. But the last part, I cannot wrap my head around that. That is so crazy. But I do want to let you know that I believe you, and I know a lot of my followers will believe you. Even though there might be some hate comments, it depends on how far this video goes. We believe you. That's what we do here. We do not judge. And I am so sorry that you had to go through that alone and that you felt like you couldn't tell anybody. And I hope that getting this story out has helped you in some way, because that's a terrifying thing to go through alone and just kind of have that fester inside of you. But tell me what you guys thought the scariest part of the video was, and tell me what you think of this creature thing. I would love to know. Drop in the comments. But as always, please be respectful. And now I'm going to do my favorite part, which is the shout outs. Cabin Lover 267. Thank you so much for what you said. That was such a nice comment. I'm so glad that you like my stories. That means so much to me. Thank you so much for being a part of my community and for leaving nice comments and for watching my videos and for telling me that. I love to hear that. And also, I just appreciate you, and I hope that you know that so much as an individual. Thank you. I love you. Jody Witter. Thank you so much. You said that you listen to my stories while you're at work. I love that. I do that when I'm like working out, or I listen to them before I go to bed. I love doing that too. But I really appreciate that I can be that for somebody else. It means so much to me. So thank you for telling me that. And thank you for supporting me. Thank you so much for being a part of my community and leaving a nice comment and letting me know that. You have no idea how much I appreciate you as an individual. I love you, girl. And with that being said, my name is Kaisa, and I tell your paranormal experiences on here, or ones that you recommend to me, like 5 nights a week. So if you're into that, hit that follow button. I just need you to do 3 things for me. And what are those? Keep sending me your scary stories. Have a safe night. And what's the third one? Say it with me. Have a spooky night. Love you guys so much, my spooky babies. I'll see you in the next one. Spooky kisses and haunted hugs.
I mean, how do you even explain this? Have you ever heard of something happening where a dream doesn't just stay in your head, but somehow shows up for someone else. Because this story isn't just about someone having a nightmare. It is about two different people experiencing the same moment in two different ways. So the person telling this story says that her sister had told her about something that happened in the middle of the night. We're going to call this woman telling the story Anne. Anne's sister told her that in the middle of the night, she was awakened by the sound of Anne coming into the bedroom and pleading for her help. When she woke up out of a dead sleep, she saw Anne standing there soaking wet from head to toe, literally dripping wet like she had been submerged in water. So Anne's sister right away goes and flicks on the light, and when she turns back around, Anne is gone, just vanished in thin air. So she jumps up and she goes over to Anne's bedroom to check on her, and when she opens the door, she finds Anne dead asleep in her bed. She also said that Anne was completely bone dry, like nothing had happened. So the next morning, the sister tells Anne about what she saw. And Anne says that she will never forget it because she had a dream that night. So get this, the dream that Anne was having probably during the time her sister was checking in on her was that she was in the middle of the woods at a lake where a man had drowned her. So Anne is literally in the middle of having a dream about being drowned in a lake, and she is over in her sister's room pleading for her to help her. I mean, what would you even categorize this as? Some weird form of astral projection or something entirely different? Please, you gotta let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you have a creepy story of your own, you gotta share it. And if you're new here, definitely follow for more creepy story time.
Before I translate this story, I just want to tell you or give you like a little warning. I'm not telling you to go do this. I'm not telling you that this worked because I don't know. I am just translating the story. So remember that. So this girl says that growing up, she had always heard that animals can help you with different things. That some can help you if somebody tries to send evil your way, or some of them can even help you if you have a disease or sickness. She says that from one day to another, she started to feel really bad, and when she went to the doctor, they ended up finding a tumor in her stomach. The pain from this tumor was so intense that she couldn't eat, and she can barely even keep down liquids as well. She was very weak and she ended up bedridden. One of her aunts that was visiting her told her that she should get a cat. Obviously she couldn't get up and go get a cat, but the aunt actually bought one for her. She explains how this kitten was so tiny that it was attached to her at all times, even the first day that she met the cat. This kitten would get on her belly and it would stay there for hours. Day by day, this cat would get on her stomach and it would almost like be at her stomach like it was looking for something, and it got to the point where it started licking her stomach as well. She said that it would literally lick the area where the tumor was like for hours, and it would do this like every single day. She was too weak and too sick to even move the cat from her belly, but if she was being honest, the cat was a really good distraction from all the pain that she was feeling. She said that this went on for days, and little by little she started to notice some changes. She was able to eat some solids again. She was able to drink things again that didn't cause her to have nausea anymore, and she also even got some of her strength back, so she wasn't bedridden all the time. Now she says that the kitten started to show a little ball on its stomach, and you could tell that the cat was really uncomfortable. One day the cat just disappeared from her home for about 3 days. When the cat finally returned, it just looked really weak, so she decided to take it to the veterinarian. They obviously checked the cat out and they confirmed that the kitten had a tumor in his belly. Now this was all happening at the same time that she was getting checked by her doctors as well, and the doctors told her that her tumor had gotten so small that she wasn't going to need surgery anymore. However, her cat did end up getting worse and worse, and 4 days after she had taken it to the veterinarian, it did end up passing away. Now she says that she is 100% healthy, and the studies that the doctor did on her proved it. Apparently the tumor had disappeared completely. She says that she really misses her cat, and she fell in love with her cat, and the cat was literally by her side at her worst moments. She 1000% believes that the cat absorbed the tumor that she had and basically saved her life. What do you guys think?
I just covered a story from my inbox that was from the Appalachian Mountains, and all I could think about was this video that I watched probably a year and a half ago. It was particularly a video of a woman who was a healthcare provider for people in the Appalachian Mountains who had no running water or electricity, so they would have to regularly make these appointments with her via paper, and they would mail in like 12 weeks in advance for a an in-person evaluation. And this particular evaluation, she came in contact with a demonic presence. She's on her way up there, she gets there, and the house is covered in flies. Red flag number 1. And as she approaches the door, this person is just not well. And I guess she worked with a lot of like mentally ill individuals, but this person in particular would talk in plural. So it was not I am hungry, it was we are hungry, we have hunger, we are tired, we are sleepy. Or talk about themselves in the third person like, oh, Shane is not okay, or he does not like that. And it started to freak this woman out so bad that she was like trying to hurry it up, because this entire house was covered in newspaper on top of that. And I'm not talking about like just on the floor, like floor, ceiling, windows. It was all covered in wet newspaper, covering the windows, the door, the whole thing. And I feel like it was one of those instances where like you are there for so long, just like those pictures that you look at for too long where you start to notice things are just not right. She started to notice that something was just not right. And as she's interviewing this person, a fly keeps trying to get in her eyeball. And let me tell you something. If a fly ever is trying to get in your eyeball and is persistent on getting in your eyeball, I'm not talking about like an accident where you like fly into a bug or a bug just like accidentally lands on your eye. There is something wrong. A fly should not be trying to get into your skin. That is another red flag. And as she's interviewing this person, the fly eventually like hits her eyeball and it gets caught to the point where like she is literally like crying, trying to get this fly out of her eye. It eventually comes out, she leaves, gets back to her house. I can't remember if she told her husband all about it or what, but goes to bed, wakes up, opens the door to go to her appointment, and her front door is covered in flies. I remember what the appointment was. She was going to go see an optometrist because she felt like the fly that had been in her eye for a little bit scratched her cornea. But the front of her door was covered in flies. She gets in her car, there were flies all over the place. She's like, what the hell is going on? Gets the optometrist. The optometrist is looking at her eye and says, hey, you have a fly's leg in your eyeball. Pulls the fly leg out. All of the flies dissipate. They all just go away. How the hell do you explain that? How do you explain that? Absolutely not.
The reason Bigfoot scares me is because most of the encounters you hear are sort of friendly in nature. Bigfoot walking by through the woods, or him banging on trees with sticks, or hearing screams or noises out in the woods. But there are a few reports of Bigfoot being very aggressive and even dangerous. Now, this story takes place in upstate New York. There was this man who lived with his wife and 3 kids. And his wife and 3 kids, they would often drive back and forth between New York City and where they lived, near the Adirondack Mountains. And this particular time, his wife and 3 kids, they were staying in New York City for a couple weeks. So he was home alone. So one night he is sitting in the living room watching TV when he started to get this feeling like he was being watched, and he just couldn't shake it. He said that's when he started to hear noise coming from the backyard. So he gets up, he goes into the kitchen. There's like this big window. And as he turns the light on to the backyard, he could see the shadow of something moving in the woods behind the house. But he never physically seen anything. He just sees the shadow. So he goes and thinks, okay, maybe this is just some kind of animal. So he goes back to the living room, he sits down, but he still had this feeling like he was being watched. So he said, you know what, I'll just go to bed. So he goes to bed. Next morning, he gets up and he goes outside and he thinks, maybe there was an animal or something that came through the yard. Maybe I'll find something. As he goes out into the backyard, he's shocked to find these very large footprints that sort of look human but not human. And they are leading directly to his window. And so he follows these footprints into the woods, and he can see that something was back there. They have disturbed the forest, and some of the branches were broken, and it looked like something had been through there. So later that night, once again, he's in the living room watching TV when he gets this feeling once again, like he's being watched. And he said he started to hear these loud screams coming from the backyard. And they sounded very inhuman. They didn't sound like any animal he'd ever heard before. And they just got louder and louder. So he gets up, he goes to the back door, and he opens the door, but he leaves the screen door closed. And once again, he turns on the back light. And he said he could see the shadow, once again, of something moving in the woods behind the back, but he physically couldn't see anything. So he closes the door, and he's like, there's something out there, but I don't know what it is. And he said that's when things started to get really creepy. He started to hear the sound of stuff hitting the house. And he said it was like these large stones or sticks. They were pelting the side of this house. And he said that's when he started to hear the screams even more. And they got really, really loud. And he could see the shadowing of something just moving around. And this went on for like 2 or 3 hours. And over the next couple of days, he kept having these strange encounters where he would see stuff moving around the backyard. He would hear things, but he never physically saw this thing. And then he said one night he was asleep in bed, and he said he gets this phone call from his neighbor. And he picks it up and he's like, hey, what's going on? Like, it's pretty late. And his neighbor said, hey, there's someone trying to get in your window, but he's in some kind of like fur coat, which is weird because it's the summer and but he's trying to get in your window. So he grabs his flashlight and he grabs a firearm and he walks over to this window that the neighbor had said he was, messing with. So as he goes to the window, he pulls the blinds up. And when he shines the light, said he sees this very large, hairy, human-like creature just looking at him. And he said this thing just began to bang on the window. And it actually caused a crack. And he said that's when it took off and ran into the woods. And after that, it was completely silent the next couple of nights. And he never had an encounter again. But he said there was definitely something out there in his backyard. And it definitely felt like it wanted to harm him.
Do you guys remember watching Lo que la gente cuenta? Lo que la gente cuenta translates to what people say, and it was one of my favorite shows growing up. It was basically a Mexican horror anthology series that took primarily Mexican folklore and legends and recreated them in like a super creepy way. It started airing on TV Azteca in 2005 and stopped airing fairly recently in 2022. There are so many episodes of Lo que la gente cuenta revolving around different legends, but today we're going to talk about one of my favorite ones, El Coco. And just so we're all on the same page, El Coco is another way that people refer to El Cucuy or the Mexican boogeyman. So this episode follows the life of a little boy named Hector who lives with his single mother and his grandma. And so this family recently moved to a new area, and Hector, being a little boy, is having a hard time adjusting. The episode opens with Hector laying in his bed next to his grandmother, and he's telling his grandma that he can't sleep and he misses his old home. And his grandma is kind of just telling him it'll be okay, he'll get used to it, and she tells him to go to bed and to not pull out his little Game Boy, otherwise El Coco is gonna come get him. Hector doesn't listen, and this is where we see El Coco for the first time. Throughout the episode, an indication that El Coco is near is he'll start whistling, so if Hector doesn't see him, he hears him. And so then the next morning, we see Hector and his grandma at the table eating breakfast, and his mom comes over upset holding his sheets. His mom is telling him that he's too old to wet the bed and she doesn't understand why he keeps doing it, and he says he's sorry,
but there's something in his closet and he's too scared to get up at night. After this, they all go about their day. Hector's mom goes to work and Hector's grandma goes to the store, so Hector is left home alone. And while he's home alone, he hears a loud bang coming from the closet in his room. So he goes over to his room to see what it is, and he quite literally sees somebody opening the door to his closet, so he runs out of the apartment scared. When his grandma comes back from the store, she finds him outside the apartment, terrified, and she's like, what's going on? He tells her there's something in his closet and he's scared, so they go check it out together and there's nothing there, but when they both leave the room, the door swings open. Meanwhile, we see Hector's mom, Araceli, walking home from work when she stops by a small bookstore and she meets the bookstore owner named Angel. They pretty much click immediately, and we learn that Araceli has a love for legends and spooky things, but she doesn't actually believe in them. Araceli's mom also heavily disapproves of this new relationship because she thinks that Araceli should focus on her kid instead of romance. So then that night, Hector is in bed once again and he hears whistling and like there's something in his closet. And so then the next day, Hector is trying to tell his mom and his grandma that there's someone in his closet and he keeps hearing the whistling at night, but of course, they write him off because they assume he's just stressed from the move and doesn't like his new house. Later in the day, we see Hector's grandma going over to the local church where she is friends with the priest. So they get to talking, and eventually the priest lets her know that in their town there has been a very large amount of children that have gone missing over the past few years. The priest looks very distressed about this, very confused and very scared, and he even asks God, when is it going to end? So this definitely freaks the grandma out a little bit because she has a grandson and she's worried for his safety. And while Hector's grandma is having this conversation with the priest, Hector is walking home from school through the park. And even in the park, he starts to hear the whistling and he looks over and actually sees El Coco standing there looking at him. Hector gets home and so does his grandma, and they're eating at the table together, but Hector isn't eating. Hector's grandma is asking him what's wrong and he tells her that he saw El Coco and he keeps hearing him at night. To which his grandma starts to laugh and says, that's just a story that I tell you so that you'll behave. There's no such thing. It's okay. And it's the same kind of thing where his grandma is writing him off because she thinks that he just doesn't like the new house. A few hours after they had this conversation, Hector's grandma is on the couch taking a nap and Hector is at the kitchen table doing his homework. When all of a sudden, Hector's grandma wakes up from her sleep because she hears the whistling. She blames it on Hector trying to play a prank on her, but Hector wasn't doing it, he was doing his homework. They kind of just move on, and that night, Hector asks his grandma to please stay with him until he falls asleep because he's scared to see or hear El Coco again. She stays with him, and when he falls asleep, she heads over to the bathroom to get herself ready for bed, and she sees someone out of the corner of her eye. And immediately after, she hears Hector screaming, so his grandma and his mom rush into his room and they find him rolling around in his sheets, panicking. They write it off as Hector having a nightmare, being anxious about the move, and then they go to bed. But grandma is starting to feel a little nervous. So the next day, Hector's grandma goes back to the church to talk to the priest and confides in him about the entire situation, trying to get his opinion and his advice. She's bringing up Hector's nightmares, how he keeps seeing and hearing El Coco, and the priest looks terrified and cuts the conversation short. At this point, Hector's grandma is starting to believe him and feel a little scared herself, to the point where she's praying alone in the house and something falls over. And while this is happening at home, Hector and his mom are coming back from the doctor since his behavior was so worrying. They wanted to go get him checked out. And after the doctor's office, they run into Angel, the bookstore owner that his mom is seeing, and they go eat with him. After they eat together, he walks them home, and Hector's mom tells him to go ahead and she'll catch up with him, so her and Angel stay outside, and Hector heads upstairs to the apartment. So Hector is making his way up to the apartment when he sees a soccer ball roll into a dark corridor on its own. Being a kid, he got curious and went to go follow the ball. He's squeezing his way through the really dark corridor trying to get to the ball, and we can see El Coco standing there waiting for him. Once he realizes that he's literally standing right there, he screams, and his mom and Angel hear him and run over to him. And it's pretty much the same thing that we've been seeing throughout the whole episode, where Hector's mom doesn't believe him and thinks that he's just acting out. But Angel seems to believe him, and after Hector and his mom head up to the apartment, he goes into the dark corridor and he pulls out a sack. And so that night, when Hector is going to bed, El Coco quite literally grabs him this time and starts to drag him into the closet to take him. But luckily, his grandma comes in because she hears him screaming and nothing happens to Hector. And this was kind of his grandma's breaking point, and she goes to see the priest again the next day. The priest ends up telling her the story of El Coco and how multiple parents have come to him saying that their kids disappeared, that they would hear the same whistling and things in their closet before they went missing. Hector's grandma is terrified and asks the priest to please come to their house and bless it to get rid of the dark energy, and the priest agrees. He's blessing and cleansing the house to the best of his ability, and something flies off of a shelf and hits him in the face, which discourages him ultimately, and he tells them, "You guys need to leave because nothing can stop this dark energy." And so Hector's grandma is now fully on board with this, and she plans on telling Araceli, Hector's mom, that they need to go, but if we remember, Araceli doesn't believe in this stuff, so she writes it off as well. So in her desperation to save her family, Hector's grandma goes to see Angel, the bookstore owner, and she tells him, "Hey, I need help." Angel pretty much immediately believes her because he has read books about it before, and he ends up finding a story talking about the origin of El Coco. Essentially, El Coco was once a Spanish colonizer who made his living by indigenous people. One day he went crazy and started to kidnap indigenous children and eat them. And so eventually the parents of these children going missing found out that it was him, and they him. But because he was so evil in life, his spirit couldn't necessarily die, and now he is a demon called El Coco. Angel goes to the priest to ask for his help in getting them out of there, but the priest is not having it, and he's packing up his stuff to leave. He gives Angel a cross, tells him good luck, and sends him on his way. In that same moment, Araceli calls Angel on the phone because she thinks that somebody broke into her house. She's scoping out the house, and she comes face to face with El Coco himself. So now Araceli, Hector, and the grandma are trying to get out of the house, but of course Hector gets left behind and El Coco starts dragging him into the closet. His grandma runs back for him and she sees him face to face, and the fear is so intense that she literally Hector, Araceli, and Angel are able to make it out of the house, and because El Coco essentially took a soul already, he stopped bothering Hector. And that is basically how the episode ends. Let me know if you remember watching this when you were younger.
Dentro de la oscuridad hay demonios que acechan para llevarse a las almas inocentes y alimentarse de ellas en el infierno. O por lo menos eso es lo que la gente cuenta.
What if I told you that there are grizzly bears in Missouri? Now, grizzly bears at one time did used to roam the Great Plains. In fact, there are stories from the early explorers, including Lewis and Clark, talking about these massive, aggressive, big, large bears who they seen on a regular daily basis. Now, biologists will tell you that these bears do not exist in Missouri, but there are small populations across Missouri, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, small parts of Minnesota and Arkansas, and hunters, hikers, fishermen encounter them on a regular basis. Now, there was this cattle farmer who lived near Joplin, Missouri. And he noticed one day that something had attacked one of his cows. And he had seen predator attacks before, but nothing like this. And over the span of several months, he lost a couple more cows. And then one day he was driving out in one of his fields when he hears the cows making a bunch of sounds. And as he goes towards this group of cattle, he sees there is this large brown bear attacking one of his cows. And so he fires at this thing. The bear turns and it begins chasing him. And he ends up running into a barn and hiding up in the loft. This bear breaks through the door and actually pursues him and sits there for hours trying to get to him. And then eventually it left. But he believes, very much so, that there are still grizzly bears in Missouri.
At this point, I'm truly convinced that the scariest stuff always happens in forests. Don't ask me why, just watch the video. It all started with a guy who was driving in the middle of the forest. I don't know what was he possibly up to, but we can say that he was going somewhere and he had to take this route. And at this exact moment right here, the moment you're seeing right now, well, something happened. What happened is that the guy saw this train right here, so normally he had to stop and wait in order to let it pass. But something does not feel normal. The train is really old and it's in the middle of nowhere. Things became even weirder when the guy noticed that there is no driver and nobody was on that train. He basically saw an old train in the middle of nowhere passing in front of him, and it was empty from the start to the end. Now, some people might be like, oh my god, bro, there's nothing weird about this. A train does not necessarily need a driver. I know how train works, don't worry about that. Can you let me finish the story? Thank you. Now, back to the story. The guy who was witnessing and filming this was confused, okay? But then if you think about it, this could be anything. You know, it could be a guy who just started the engines and then hopped off the train. That's exactly why the guy who was filming was not worried at all, okay? He was like, oh, a train moving by itself? That's weird, but you know, let's keep going. Now, at first, when this video was posted on the net, everybody reacted the same. They were like, okay, that's weird. But then some people saw something that turned this story from weird to scary. Let me show you what these people are talking about. At the end of the video, you can see the guy filming the train from this angle. Now, if you're really focused here, you can see that something is behind those barriers. This something we're talking about even moves its head, as you can see right here. So the people who noticed this went to the guy who filmed the video. They were like, bro, did you see this at the end of the video? The guy was like, bro, what are y'all talking about? I didn't see anything. They're like, look, right here. Oh shit. It's basically this old ass train we're talking about in the middle of nowhere was not completely empty. This thing was on it.
Oh boy. What, Well, that ain't good. Don't know who's running that, but... I mean, yeah, okay.
Some people see the scariest shit ever and they go like, oh, that ain't exactly good. Of course that ain't good, bro. What the hell is that?
You know, at night when you have to turn the lights off in your house and you get to that last light and you switch it off and it's completely dark and it feels like all of a sudden your house has now become the most haunted house in the world and you have to make a run all the way back to your bedroom. There might be something to that. Now, when we are doing this, right, we put ourselves in a vulnerable position. And I think anything negative, any kind of spirit that is a negative entity knows this. This is the best time to scare us. And they're trying to see if they could scare us just a little bit to gain entry and to allow them permission to come into our lives. So this is a story I heard out of Rockford, Illinois. There was this girl and she lived in this bigger house all alone. And it started to get late. She wanted to go to bed. So she starts going through her house, turning off all the lights. She gets to the last light, which is in the living room. And when she hits it off and it goes completely dark, she gets that feeling. Well, she walks through her living room, and as she walks past her kitchen, she turns and kind of glances in, and she sees a woman, like in a white gown, just standing in the kitchen. And she's like, who are you? What do you want? And the woman just starts walking towards her. So she takes off running to her bedroom. She closes her door, locks it, and she calls the police. The police show up and she says, you know, come inside, like there's a woman in my house. I'm in my bedroom, locked in there. I don't want to come out. So they go through her house, they search it, they don't find anyone. And they said, ma'am, are you sure you didn't just see something? Like, you know, are you just tired and maybe it was like a hallucination? And she goes, no, I'm for sure there was a woman in my kitchen. So they said, well, we can't find anything. You probably are just tired. Why don't you just go to bed? So they leave and she goes back up to her bedroom. And when she lays down in bed, she kind of feels like, you know what, maybe that was just in my head, maybe I'm just tired and I need to get some sleep. So as she turns around to adjust herself in the bed, there is the woman standing right next to her. And she jumps up, she runs out of her house, and she said as she's in the front of her house, she can see the woman looking out of her window, staring at her. Believe it or not, there is a doll more terrifying than Annabelle. Now, this story didn't get much news coverage, and not much is known about it, but it took place in Los Angeles, in Santa Monica, and the story goes, there was this husband and wife. Now, the husband worked as an architect, and he would often travel overseas. Now, their son, he really wanted a Teletubby doll. And at this time in the 90s, there was this crazy obsession, and everyone wanted to find this doll. But you couldn't get it at any store. It was sold out. So the father, who's overseas on a work trip, he finds one of these Teletubby dolls, and he buys it. And he brings it back to the son. Well, the first couple of days, the son's happy, he loves this toy, and he's playing with it all the time. But then one night, everyone was in bed. The mother, she wakes up, and she starts tossing and turning, and she couldn't sleep. So she got up out of bed, and she walked towards the kitchen. As she's in the hallway, she hears this loud banging sound coming from her son's room. So she immediately goes to his room, she opens the door, and she finds the son with his legs up on the bed, hanging off, and right next to him is this Teletubby doll. So she says to her son, like, what are you doing? Why are you out of bed? Like, what's going on? What was that sound? And the son's like, it was nothing. It was nothing. So the mom picks him up, puts him back into bed, and she takes the doll and she sets it over on this chair. As she's walking out of the bedroom, this doll started to talk. The voice box started to go off. And she thought that was strange because her son's in bed, the doll's all the way over on this chair, and there was nothing pressing the button. So she's like, okay, that's kind of eerie. She closes the door and she goes into the kitchen. And over the next couple of weeks, she keeps hearing noises at night in her son's room. And when she goes in there, she finds her son always on the floor or, hanging off the bed. And when she asks her son, what's wrong, he says nothing. And then she starts to notice the dog. The dog did not like this doll. And every time it would go around the doll, it would growl. So one day she's in the kitchen sitting drinking some coffee. She starts hearing the dog growling. So she tells the dog, just leave the doll alone, like get away from it. And all of a sudden this dog lets out a yelp and it starts crying and it books it into the kitchen and goes right under her legs. And when she comes out into the hallway where this doll is, she sees the doll sitting in the chair. And that kind of freaked her out a little bit, but she thought, I'm just imagining things, like it's nothing. So this strange stuff kept going on where her son would, fall out of the bed and the dog would be scared. And then one night she gets up out of bed. She thinks that, I better go check on my son. So she goes towards his room, but in another room, she starts hearing the dog growling. And she thinks, why is the dog like in this other room? Like, how did he get in there? So she goes to the bedroom. She opens the door. The dog isn't in there, but there is the doll on the floor. So instantly she said, you know what? Like, I'm done with this doll. I'm getting rid of it. So the next day she takes this doll and she gives it to a thrift store. And after a couple months, like, everything is fine. But then one day she receives a phone call and she starts hearing the voice box of that doll saying, hi, hello, and then giggling. And for months, she would continuously receive phone calls from this doll, from a random number. And still to this day, no one knows what happened to that doll or where it went, but it was known as one of the creepiest doll stories in the United States.
My name is Kevin, and I live in Phoenix, Arizona. This happened in my bedroom when I was 17 years old, and it's something I will never forget. Growing up, I constantly heard stories about a certain house in my neighborhood. People whispered about a dead woman who appeared inside it. A woman with short blonde hair, dressed in a white 1960s style sleeping gown, with no eyes, just empty dark sockets. The stories terrified me. My tia lived nearby, and neighbors would often tell her how families never stayed long in that house. Something always drove them away. Years later, my family decided to move. We were excited for a fresh start until we realized where we were moving. We had never actually seen the haunted house before, only heard the stories, and somehow, without knowing it, that was the house we chose. The day after we moved in, I told a friend at school about our new place, and he wanted to come over after class. As we walked toward my house, he suddenly stopped. His face went pale. "Wait, that's your new house?" he asked quietly. I answered yes. He froze for a moment before whispering, "You moved into the haunted house." My stomach dropped. I felt sick when he confirmed it was that house, the one with the lady. I didn't even know what to say. Still, my dad refused to move. He always said, "No le tengas miedo a los muertos, tenle miedo a los vivos." Don't fear the dead, fear the living. Living there never felt right. It always felt like someone was watching us. At night, we'd hear footsteps on the stairs, even when everyone was asleep. Chairs would move on their own, lights turned off by themselves, strange noises echoed through the house. But for years, we never actually saw her. Then came the night that changed everything. I was sleeping on my back, staring at the ceiling, when I felt that heavy sensation. Sleep paralysis. I knew I wasn't fully asleep because I could still see my brother across the room. I tried to move, but couldn't. Then I looked at the doorway. She was standing there. She looked exactly like the stories described. Short blonde hair, a long white nightgown, and no eyes. I tried to scream my brother's name, but nothing came out. I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe. I blinked, and she was closer. I blinked again, closer. Every blink brought her nearer, until she was right beside my bed. At that moment, I truly believed I was going to die. Suddenly, she attacked me. She scratched me, hit my face, and clawed at my arms and neck. I felt everything. I tried screaming, begging for help, but my body was frozen. Seeing her up close was the most evil, sinister thing I've ever witnessed. When I finally woke up the next morning, I had a pounding headache. My body ached, and there were scratches on my arms and neck. After I told my family what happened, no one wanted to step foot inside the house, especially the bathroom. That's where you could feel her presence the most. I eventually named her Emily. Over time, I got used to the activity. The noises never stopped. The feeling of someone being in the room with you never went away. My dad still lives there with my younger siblings, and to this day, I hope they never experience what I did with Emily. Because once you see her, you never forget her.
They told me not to answer anything in the Appalachian Mountains, even if it sounds human. So a couple years ago, I went hiking through the Appalachian Mountains with one of my friends. We weren't doing anything too crazy, just like a 2-day overnight trip just on one of the trails. Before we headed out, one of the locals at the gas station asked where we were going, and we let him know that we were just going to go to the Appalachian Mountains. And he just kind of paused and looked at us and he said, "Okay, whatever you hear out there, don't respond to it." We kind of just laughed it off, but I really wish we didn't. The first night was pretty normal. We got there, we set up, we made some food. But further into the night, that's when things got a little eerie. It got really, really quiet. And when I say quiet, I mean like dead quiet. No bugs, no wind, no other weird noises. At some point when we were sitting in our tent, my friend asked me, "Do you hear that?" And I said, "No, hear what?" And it was my name being called very, very faintly. It was coming from somewhere in the trees, and my immediate thought was somebody was messing with us or another hiker was messing with us. So I unzipped the tent and I stuck my head out and I said, "Hello?" My friend grabbed my arm and he said, "Don't." And then that's when I realized the very faint voice had the same tone as my friend, the same voice. It sounded exactly like him. And then we heard it again, from the distance, my name, in the tone of my friend's voice, but this time it was a little closer. This time it was coming from a different direction, like it was able to move without making any noise at all. And this went on for the next hour. Sometimes it was my voice calling his name, so it was switching off. Sometimes it sounded like somebody was just talking. Sometimes it sounded like somebody was crying, weeping. At times it sounded like it was right outside of our tent. We never checked. We didn't respond. We actually wound up falling asleep at some point, and then when we woke up the next morning, everything felt normal again. Birds, wind, sunlight, we began to pack everything up. We were trying to quickly get out of there because we were spooked from the night before. And as we were leaving, we passed another hiking group, and they said, "Did you hear any noises last night?" And we just kind of paused. And then they said something that really stuck with me. They said, "Sometimes people hear voices at night, and the ones that respond back, they don't usually come back the same." Obviously, after that, we decided to skip the second night, and we just headed back to our car and we left. And we have not been back there since, because whatever was out there knew exactly what we sounded like, and it knew our names.
Might have known the story of real-life boogeyman.
From 1867 to 1974, there were laws called ugly laws. These laws prohibited visibly disabled and diseased individuals from entering public spaces. Now, I found out about ugly laws when I was doing research on my attic here, because when we bought our house and we did a tour, the realtor told us that this room off to the side in our attic may have been used as a quarantine room. Which makes sense because this house was built in 1763, and back in the day, diseases could take out whole bloodlines and entire families. So I was like, yeah, that definitely tracks. Until I posted my very first TikTok on here showing my attic. And everybody freaked out, saying that this is probably not a quarantine room, but may have been used originally as a disappointment room. Okay. Which goes hand in hand with the ugly laws, because a disappointment room is where a family would keep maybe a disabled child or somebody that was disfigured that they wanted to keep out of the public eye. Now, obviously, you can see at one point this was converted into like a shop-like area, but what its original use was, as far as this room, I don't know, and I'm not sure I'm ever going to know. I think a pretty logical explanation is maybe servants' quarters, but this is just one tiny little room, and I don't really know how that worked back in the day, but I just wanted to share that. The comforter is in here. I feel like I need to reiterate. The comforter is in here because I put it up here for a little prank video a couple years ago when we first moved in, and then I ended up leaving it up here because every time I came back, people would be like, the comforter's in a different position, or it's changed. That also contributed to why we ended up putting a Ring camera in here. But I just wanted to go over that. It's been a while since I talked about it, and every once in a while people will drop a comment mentioning ugly laws, and I have talked about it before. Wish I knew, guys. Wish I knew exactly what went on around here.
I always love reading for the Green Manor. Kaylee and I did a Halloween episode together. But, okay, I never catch orbs. But did anyone see? There was an orb. I swear there was an orb. I didn't read through the comments, so maybe you guys saw it. But it comes up from, like, here, like where the phone is, and out right before she starts to talk about the blanket. And then as she's talking about the blanket, I saw something like there's something else, like a glitch or something over that blanket, which is weird because before I saw all of that, because I watched the video a couple times because I have to get a feel for the energy of the space, and I saw a boy right away sitting in the corner here against the wall right behind the blanket. Now, this boy isn't stuck though, because Kaylee's energy and her partner and her animals, they don't hold energy in that space. Energies move through there, absolutely. There's all kinds of beings there, yes, but she doesn't hold anyone who needs to cross over. So there's this boy right there in the corner, right behind the blanket. I saw him right away, and I'm going to see if he can tell us what went on in that space. I don't feel like this is a boy that is stuck. I think I'm seeing more of an imprint, and I'll be able to read his experience off of the imprint. So he's sitting there and he's like holding his knees, crouched in the corner, scared. And he has been left in there by himself. I don't feel that he's sick. It feels more like a punishment. He had parents that were physically abusive with him, and they would lock him in there. And he ultimately died in there of starvation. I don't feel I'm speaking to him, and I don't feel that he is there. He's gone. That's just like the imprint. I feel a lot of people, like doctors, but not because of a disease. But there's like doctors moving, like there's a nurse in particular I see that is moving through the space. Again, this isn't a spirit that I'm seeing. This is more trying to get an imprint of what went on there. I feel like they saw patients there. I feel like there was medicine that was doled out there. There was treatments that were given there. Not bad, not bad. These were intended to heal and to help. And so this space feels like I'm seeing rotating people. So it feels very much like it was used as a pharmacy / small private doctor's office at one point also. This is why there's so much energy in that space. And every time she showed you that door's not opening and closing like just because of the hinges. Like there's energy in there moving that door. Different energies. And there even is like because I'm seeing like the circular motion of people constantly coming through that space. Again, it feels like it was a doctor's office. One doctor, one nurse, and a lot of people rotating through there. In this situation I'm describing, this is separate above and beyond the young boy that I saw there. This is completely different owners, different time. And I don't feel anything bad really happened. I don't feel like people passed there. This was definitely feels like a place of healing. It's interesting though, because when I go to feel like families with children that lived there, it gives me this strange feeling. Like it's like the families that lived there couldn't seem to figure out how to parent kindly. And that room was like just constantly used as a space to like discard, which maybe what I'm describing is exactly what she was saying about, I hate that name. I know she didn't, name it that, but the ugly room, it's just, anyway, that's probably what I'm picking up on, because I just feel this discarding of human life, and just souls just doing this, or the life being sucked out of children because they weren't appropriate, or didn't act or look the way they were supposed to. And just this constant taking, and it's not taking of their life, it's taking their soul, taking their dignity, taking their essence, by just being mean. But I'm feeling this coming from multiple different families that lived there. Like it must have been a common practice. So I do have to validate that, yeah, this room was used as a place to put humans to basically discard them and break their soul. Hopefully that gives Kaylee a little bit more information on what went on there.
I need to tell you guys this ghost story. This story was sent into my email, and if you have any ghost stories, scary stories, or paranormal encounters that you'd like to share, you can send them to the email in my bio. I've had nightmares before. Sleep paralysis, weird dreams, all of it. But this is the only time something happened that I still can't convince myself was just in my head. It was a completely normal night. Nothing weird leading up to it. It was raining, very heavily, but that's not unusual in the UK. It was just constant rain hitting the windows, that steady sound you kind of fall asleep to. I went to bed around midnight. I was exhausted, and I fell asleep almost immediately. Then, at some point in the night, I woke up. I didn't check the time, but it felt like it was in the middle of the night. Everything was still dark. The rain was still pouring outside. At first, nothing felt off. I wake up randomly sometimes, so I didn't think anything of it. But then I looked across my room, and that's when I saw it. In the corner of my room, there was a figure. Tall, thin. It looked almost stretched. Completely black, solid, just standing there. Standing next to it was my best friend and his little sister, just standing there with it. facing it. And I remember his little sister. She was pointing at it. Like she was trying to show me that it was there. Like she wanted me to see it. And for a second, my brain tried to make sense of it. Why are they here and how did they get in? But before I could even react, they were gone. All of them, just gone. Then I felt this sudden jolt, like that falling feeling when you wake up too fast. I blinked and looked around. I was still in my room and everything was normal. Dark, rain still hitting the windows. And for a second I thought, okay, that had to be a dream. It just didn't feel real. But then, right in front of me, my wardrobe doors flew open, violently, like something had yanked them apart, and I froze. Because everything inside was still. Nothing fell, nothing was disturbed, just the doors swinging. And then they started slamming. Open, closed, over and over, fast and loud, echoing through the room, and I tried to move, but I couldn't. My body wouldn't respond. I was completely stuck. Like I was glued to the bed. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. My mouth was moving. I could feel it, but there was no sound. And that's when the panic really hit. Because I could feel everything. The bed under me, the air, my heartbeat. I was awake. I knew I was awake. So how could this be a dream? The doors kept slamming, faster and louder. And then suddenly, I could move. I shot up out of bed, and the wardrobe doors slammed shut. Silence. Just like that. And I just stood there, trying to process what just happened, trying to convince myself that it wasn't real, my heart racing, but then I heard something downstairs, a cupboard, opening and closing. Slow at first, and then faster, over and over again, and that's when the fear came back even worse. Because my family would never be downstairs at this time, ever. So I ran, straight out of my room, down the hall, into my dad's room, and woke him up. I told him something was downstairs. He could tell I was serious, so we both went down together. Every light was off, the house was completely quiet. We checked the kitchen. Nothing. Checked the cupboards, and they were all closed. Nothing was out of place. There was no movement, there was no sound, there was nothing, but then we noticed something. The living room door was open, and we never left that door open. Neither of us could explain it. So I went back upstairs, and I didn't sleep. I turned my TV on and left it on that entire night, just for noise, so it didn't feel too quiet. To this day, I still don't know what that was, because it didn't feel like a dream. My dad remembers me waking up. He remembers checking downstairs, so I know that part was real, which means something had to have happened. And a few days before that, when I was home alone, I had heard someone running behind me, chasing me down the stairs. And when I turned around, no one was there. So now I can't tell what's worse.
The things I find on the internet.
His body's in the car is stranded. Wait, you have a body in the car right now? Yes.
So before you react to this and you're like, how evil is this man? He has a body in the car. Just take a second. Because what I found when I actually dug into this case is so much worse than that 5-second clip I just showed you. So let's talk about it. And really quickly, I'm sorry if I mispronounce any of the victims' names. So Shankar is 53, living in Roseville, California, in a house with his wife, Gyoti, and their 3 kids, Varen, who's 20, and has just been accepted to Sacramento State, Gary, who's 16, and Nishal, who's 13. From the outside, and I mean strictly from the outside, this looks like a family who's doing pretty decently for themselves. I mean, Shankar had a career in data architecture and IT, which just from hearing that, you'd probably think that's impressive and pays you well enough to feel like you got it all figured out. But that was horribly far from the truth of what was truly going on behind closed doors. Because in the 14 years leading up to 2018, Shankar had moved his family 19 times. Not twice, not 5 times, 19 cities in 14 years. And I want you to sit with what that does to their kids. That's no best friend that lasts longer than a school year. That's no bedroom that feels like yours. That's a childhood that never gets to really put down any roots, because every time anytime something or somewhere starts to feel like home, the boxes just come right back out. And it's not like he's moving because he was chasing opportunity or looking for something better. He had been running for years from a debt with the IRS that had grown to $178,000. And in 2018, that finally caught up with him. He had lost his job, and just like that, the thing he'd been sprinting from for over a decade was standing directly in front of him, and he had no money, no plan, and no more room to run. Not this time. The bills started slipping fast. Groceries became something that he had to think about before he actually bought. Varen's college, which should have been a moment of pride for his family, became a source of dread instead. And his marriage, which had already been stretched thin from years of instability and secrets and this particular kind of exhaustion that comes from pretending that everything is fine, started falling apart. And here is where the story really just takes a complete 180. Because Shankar had spent the better part of 2 decades building an identity around being the one who held things together, the provider, the decision maker, the man who handled it all. And now, for the first time, every single part of that was gone. And instead of letting that be humbling, instead of cracking the door open and telling his family the truth and asking for help, he took that shame and he compressed it into something that is genuinely hard to sit with. He convinced himself that if he can't provide for his own family, if there is truly no way out of this, then none of them should exist. And I want to be precise about that for a second, because it's easy to read it as a man who snapped, who broke down and stopped knowing what he was doing. But that's not what this was. Shankar couldn't bring himself to physically hurt his family. So instead, he did something that required way more calculation than that. He looked at each person in that house and figured out a way to make them leave this world voluntarily. He started with his wife, Gyoti. And let's picture that conversation for a second. Your husband is sitting right across from you, and he's finally, after all these years, being honest. He's telling you how bad everything's gotten. There's no more money. There's no job. The IRS is after him. All of it. And for a moment, I can imagine that felt like the husband she's been waiting for. The one who stops pretending that everything is fine and just talks to you. But then he kept going. He started telling her that things were only gonna get harder from here, that the life waiting for them on the other side of this, the collection notices, the shame, the starting over, it wasn't one worth living. And then he pulled out the one thing he knew would make her break. He talked about her faith, about the afterlife, about their vows, and what it means to go together. And how if she went first, if she trusted him enough to go first, he promised that he and the kids will follow. And on the other side of all of this would be something so much better with all of them together. And she believed him because she was his wife and that was her husband. And because that's what loving someone for years can do to your judgment. It can make you trust a voice that you should be questioning. She believed that was Shankar loving her in the worst moment of their lives. That same night in their bedroom, Shankar pulled a footstool to the center of the room. He helped Gyoti step up onto it, and he settled this thick rope hanging from the ceiling fan around her neck with his hands, the same hands that had held her for years. And she stood there, trusting him, and then he kicked the stool from under her feet as her body stayed mid-air. She remained in that bedroom 4 days. He didn't move her, he didn't cover her, he just left her there, avoiding the reality of what he's just done. And then he walked down the hall to Gari and Nishal's room. He told Gari and Nishal that he had failed them, that he had let the whole family down, and that their mother had loved him enough to trust him and go first. And if they choose to stay, then they would be left in a world with nothing. They would have no parents, no stability, no money, no one in their corner. Just 2 kids swallowed up by a world that had already taken everything from them. But then he told them the way out of all of that, how mom was already waiting and all they had to do was follow her and he would be right behind them. And on the other side of all of this, somewhere far away from the dead, the shame, the falling apart, their family would be together again. And so, probably trembling, they listened to their father's words and trusted him. And they stepped onto that same stool with the ropes around their necks. And as he stood there, probably whispering, "I'll be right there, I'll be right behind you, I promise," Shankar kicked it out from under their feet, and with that, he took both of his children's lives. I've been trying to find a way to write about this without just flattening it into a fact, and I'm not sure if I ever can, but I just keep thinking about one word: trust. These kids trusted him the way that children should trust their fathers, with this deep, without question trust. And then he used that and he weaponized the most unconditional love in that house to get them to do exactly what he wanted. That is not a man. That is not a man who broke. That is a man who knew exactly what he was doing, and he chose to keep doing it. And then there's Varen. Varen is 20 years old with Sacramento State waiting for him in the fall, genuinely on the edge of his own life opening up into something that was entirely his own. And so after Shankar ended his wife and youngest 2 kids, he kind of realized that convincing a 20-year-old who had something to look forward to, a future he could actually see, that was going to be much harder to sell. So instead, Shankar called him up and suggested a road trip, just the 2 of them, father and son, driving through Northern California. Now, I don't know what Varen knew when he got into that car. I genuinely don't know if he walked out of that front door aware of what was on the other side of his mother's bedroom door, or if Shankar had kept it from him. But what I do know is that they drove together for 4 days, having whatever conversations it took to convince Varen to take that same step forward that the rest of the family already did. And on October 13th, parked somewhere on a remote stretch of land near the Oregon border, Shankar took a rope out and he strangled his own son. Varen was the only one that Shankar killed with his hands directly. And I think about that distinction a lot because the others, Gyothi, Gari, and Ishal, they were all convinced to take that final step themselves, which means that the manipulation worked. But Varen was different. Varen was an adult, and convincing a 20-year-old to end his existence because his dad lost his job and couldn't pay his taxes was going to be a lot harder than the younger ones at home. So during that drive, I'm assuming that Varen didn't agree, and Shankar stopped trying to persuade and decided to just use his hands instead. That is insane. And after that, he just drove 230 miles south to Shasta Police Department alone in a car with his son's body in the backseat. I don't know what was going on through that man's mind during the drive. Was he regretful? Did he feel like he had no right to follow them after what he just done to Varen? Did the promise he made to his wife and kids feel different now that he was the only one left? I don't know. We don't know. But what we do know is that he walked through those police station doors and told the officer standing there that he had killed his own family, their bodies are still at home, and that his son was in the car outside. If I was an officer and somebody confessed that to me, I think I would just faint right there. I mean, their ability to jump on their feet and act is way beyond me. On November 10th, 2021, a judge sentenced Shankar to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. And the prosecutor, before Shankar was walked out, had said something that I really think deserves to be said out loud one more time. These children were social. They had goals. They had hopes. They had friends who loved them. They had whole lives sitting right in front of them. And the one person in the world whose entire job was to make sure they got to live those lives was the exact person who took them away. That is all for today. Please tell your people that you love them, tell your kids that they are safe, and that there is nothing in the world, no debt, no failure, no rock bottom, that is worth way more than they are. I love you guys, and just like my sweater says, group hug.
In British Columbia, there's a map of unidentified human remains of various people found across Vancouver Island. There's body parts that have been found, but never have been successfully connected to a specific missing persons case. And in British Columbia, but on that island specifically, the amount of people who go missing is insane, and it's not a new thing. Forensic analysis have tracked unsolved disappearances heavily from the 1980s to the present day, some even dating back to the 1950s. What is going on in that island? Let's talk about just one of those unsolved disappearances. It takes us back to March of 1991, when a 4-year-old little boy vanished. Michael Wayne Donahue was born May 12th of 1986 to his parents Crystal and Bruce. He also had a baby sister named Caitlin. At the time of his disappearance, he was only 4 years old, almost 5, with his whole life ahead of him. March 24th was a Sunday, and that day has been on constant replay in Crystal Donahue's mind ever since. She was on her way to a Sunday football game with her entire family. It was a windy afternoon, but a pretty normal Sunday on Vancouver Island, and Crystal was playing in a women's flag football game at Blanchard Elementary School. Bruce, her husband, Michael's father, was also there to watch, and he had Caitlin, Michael's little sister, with him as well. But Michael was a 4-year-old little boy. He really didn't have any interest in watching the football game. He wanted to play. The school playground was right there, just steps away, perfectly visible from the the field. Michael's asking to go play. Crystal's hesitating. Meanwhile, she's zipping up his hoodie because it's a windy day outside, and eventually she just gives in. She says, okay, you can go play in the playground. I'll watch you from here. Just wait right there. Do not move, and Daddy will come get you in a second. Michael ran off to the playground, and that was the last time Crystal or anyone who has ever come forward would see Michael Donaghy ever again. He disappeared in what felt like seconds. He was last seen around 12:30 p.m. just after the family arrived at the field for the game. Shortly after he went to go play, Bruce went to check on him, and he wasn't there. As soon as Crystal looked over as well and didn't see him, every adult stopped. About 50 people started spreading out looking for Michael, calling out his name. His parents called the police immediately because Crystal just had a really bad gut feeling and she wasn't gonna let any time pass by without knowing where her son went. But it made no sense because it was a school playground. It was Sunday afternoon. The area was full of families and people that were there to watch the game. There were people everywhere, and yet minutes passed. They turned into hours, and there just seemed to be no witnesses in Michael's disappearance. Not a single person saw what happened, at least not anyone that has ever come forward. He was just there, and then he wasn't. Pretty quickly, police classified the case as an abduction rather than a missing child's case because of how quickly they noticed that he was missing. And because he was only 4 years old, he couldn't have run off and gotten that far away on his own. And all detectives from the Victoria Police Department were called in. Pretty quickly, tips started coming in, hundreds of tips from across North America. And at that time, they had to be written out on paper and sorted out manually because remember, 1991, there were no digital tip systems, no CCTV cameras on every corner, no Amber Alert. There was only so much they were working with. And when the hours turned into days and then into weeks and then into months, authorities continued following every tip and interviewing possible witnesses around the area. And one detail kept coming up. The only witness report really that police were able to uncover was from someone who described a strange man in his either late 40s or late 50s with a brown van near the playground. A month after Michael's disappearance, police staged a recreation of that day at the elementary school, hoping that having the community walking through might make someone remember an important detail that could help them out in the investigation, but it didn't. And with only a description of a suspicious brown van, eventually the case went cold, and it is still unsolved to this day. In 2006, reports of a man who physically resembled Michael and had been living in British Columbia ever since 1990 came up, but DNA testing confirmed that he was not Michael. In 2009, police in Milwaukee, Wisconsin found a missing persons poster with Michael's face on it at the home of a man named Vernon who had confessed to a psychiatrist that he had information in relation to a missing children's case. But he passed away from natural causes before investigators could fully explore that lead. In 2011, police were notified of a man living in Chase, British Columbia who looked strikingly like Michael, but again, DNA testing confirmed that he was not. But Crystal already knew. She had said, "Show me a picture and I will tell you," saying that she thinks, being a mother, she would recognize her own son. When Michael Donaghy was last seen, he was wearing a blue hooded jacket with red lining and red cuffs, a teenage Ninja Turtles t-shirt with multicolored rugby pants and blue sneakers. If he is still alive today, Michael Donaghy would be 38 years old, and his family has made it more than clear that they will never ever give up on looking for Michael. And the reason why I wanted to bring attention to this case is not only for Michael Donaghy and the Donaghy family to keep receiving the attention and the awareness that they deserve, but also because Michael Donaghy isn't the only child or person who has disappeared on Vancouver Island in Canada. Children, hikers, tourists, locals have been vanishing on Vancouver Island for decades and at a rate that is more than double the national average, and it feels impossible to get any answers to any of these cases. And obviously, so many families have been affected by these disappearances. There are so many questions in the conversation regarding this. Why are so many cases unsolved? What do they have in common? Why on that island? There has been talk of possible cult connection. Some people blame it on the wilderness. Others think that it might be the same person responsible who just hasn't been caught. Who knows? But the film that is in theaters today, was just released today. It's called Hunting Matthew Nichols, and it's inspired by these events. And I want you guys to know the reason why I think these kind of films are important to watch and talk about, especially this one because it's inspired by these events and that island, is because the more that people know about a case or a location or an unsolved mystery or mysteries, plural, the more likely it is that the right conversation will be brought up and that maybe something will come up that will help solve a real case. You never know these days with the power of social media and technology and films like these that bring awareness. I think it is so incredibly helpful in making sure that unsolved mysteries do not stay unsolved. It's also an incredible film, and I really encourage you guys to watch it this weekend in theaters. But yeah, that is all I have for you guys today. Let me know if you've ever heard of Michael's case or any other missing persons case on Vancouver Island. Let me know if you guys watch Hunting Matthew Nichols in theaters this weekend. I want to know your thoughts on that as well. And yeah, thank you for spending time with me today. I hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.